It began as the kind of afternoon that makes childhood feel endless. Warm sunlight slanting through the trees, the air alive with laughter, and the smell of pine carried on a gentle June breeze. It was Father's Day weekend, June 14th, 1969, in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where the Martin family, father, son, grandfather, and brother, had come for a tradition as old as their roots, a simple camping trip. A few days under the open sky, a chance for young Dennis Martin, just 6 years old, to play among the trails, creeks, and tall Tennessee grass. By all accounts, Dennis was an adventurous but cautious child, bright, cheerful, small for his age, with brown hair and an eager smile. He'd been looking forward to this trip for months. It was his first real wilderness adventure with the men of his family. The group had spent the morning hiking up from Cades Cove to a scenic clearing known as Spence Field, where grassy meadows met the dense, whispering tree line of the Smokies. They weren't alone. Another Martin family unrelated, but coincidentally sharing the same last name, was camping nearby. The children, delighted by the coincidence, quickly became playmates. That's when the idea of a prank came up. The kids, giggling and full of mischief, decided to hide behind trees and jump out to scare the adults as they approached. Dennis, being the youngest, chose his spot behind a bush a few yards away, a little deeper into the trees, but still within earshot. The adults waited. The other children burst out laughing, jumping from their hiding places, but Dennis never appeared. At first, no one panicked. Dennis was small. Maybe he'd picked a better hiding spot, or wandered a few steps farther than the others. His father, William Martin, called out his name, expecting an echo of laughter in return. "Dennis, come on out, buddy." Silence. He called again, louder this time. Nothing. In seconds, the mood shifted. The laughter drained from the air, replaced by an uneasy quiet. The trees seemed to absorb the sound. Even the birds went still. William began to jog through the brush, circling the area, then running, then shouting. Within 5 minutes, he was sprinting through the forest, his voice breaking as he screamed his son's name over and over, the sound scattering across the ridges of Spence Field. But Dennis was gone, completely gone. What followed in those first few hours was a father's worst nightmare unfolding in real time. The Martin family scoured every inch of Spence Field. They split up, retracing steps, combing the trails, shouting until their throats went raw. By nightfall, the sky darkened and rain began to fall, heavy, cold, relentless. The storm would prove devastating. It washed away footprints, erased scent trails, and turned the ground to mud. It was as if nature itself had decided to help the boy disappear. At dawn, park rangers and volunteers arrived. Word spread quickly, and soon hundreds of people were involved. By the end of the week, it would become one of the largest search and rescue missions in U.S. National Park history. The military joined in. Green Berets from nearby Fort Bragg arrived by helicopter to assist. FBI agents were dispatched. Bloodhounds were brought in. Airplanes flew overhead. Search teams swept the ridges in expanding circles. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of fabric. Not a sound. The forest, vast and unyielding, swallowed every clue. To understand why this case still haunts America, you have to know the boy behind the name. Dennis Lloyd Martin was a 6-year-old from Knoxville, Tennessee. A bright, polite first grader who loved baseball, hiking, and drawing. He was the youngest son of William and Clyde Martin, and by all accounts, deeply close to his family. He was small but sturdy, dressed that day in a red t-shirt and shorts, with white socks and tennis shoes, a detail that would become heartbreakingly important. The bright color, intended to make him easy to spot in the woods, should have made him stand out. It didn't. The Martins were experienced hikers. They knew the Smokies well and had no reason to suspect danger. The trail they took was popular and well-marked. The weather had been perfect until the rainstorm hit. But what makes this case different from countless other wilderness disappearances is not just the age of the victim or the scale of the search. It's the fact that Dennis vanished within sight of adults in broad daylight. Without a sound, in a place where visibility stretched for hundreds of feet, there was no scream, no rustling, no trace. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed him whole. The Great Smoky Mountains are breathtaking, ancient ridges blanketed in mist, endless valleys carved by time, and forests older than America itself. But locals know they can turn from serene to sinister in moments. The park spans over 500,000 acres of rugged terrain, with ravines, caves, and animal dens hidden beneath the canopy. Wild boars roam the thickets. Black bears drift through the shadows. The weather shifts in minutes, fog rolling in so thick it feels alive. More than 1,600 people have gone missing in America's national parks since record-keeping began, and the Smokies are no exception. Yet none have baffled searchers like the disappearance of little Dennis Martin. Rangers who were there still talk about it. The oppressive quiet that fell over Spence Field. The feeling that they were searching a place that didn't want to be searched. 2 days after Dennis vanished, a family camping a few miles away near Rowan's Creek reported hearing a terrifying, childlike scream in the woods around dusk, followed by the sight of a strange, rough-looking man darting through the trees, apparently trying to hide something over his shoulder. The location matched the general direction of the wind from Spencefield that night. The witness reported it immediately to park officials, but strangely, to lead Wazan. T followed up for days. When investigators finally searched the area, the rain had long since destroyed any trace of what might have been there. It was the first and only potential clue. From that moment on, the search grew desperate. Teams hiked farther, dug deeper, and risked injury combing ravines, caves, and riverbeds. At one point, over 1,400 people were searching at once, but the more they looked, the less they found. To this day, not a single item belonging to Dennis Martin. No clothing, no shoes, no remains has ever been discovered. It's as if the mountains themselves had decided to keep their secret. By the second morning after Dennis vanished, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park had become a command center. Rangers, rescue teams, Boy Scouts, Green Berets, and local volunteers flooded in from every direction. The park's headquarters was swarming with radios, maps, and desperate parents. It was no longer a family tragedy. It was now a national emergency. The search quickly escalated into one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Helicopters scoured the mountains from above. Bloodhounds, trained to follow human scent for miles, were unleashed across the ridges. Hundreds of people spread out in grid formations, covering every ravine and trail. But the mountains, beautiful as they were, seemed almost alive and hostile. Thick fog rolled in daily, swallowing entire search teams. The weather shifted without warning. Rain, then heat, then cold again. Mudslides formed on slopes so steep that rescuers had to crawl on their hands and knees. Even the most seasoned rangers admitted the Smokies felt different during those days, like they were hiding something. Searchers began within a half-mile radius of where Dennis was last seen. It should have been simple. A 6-year-old boy couldn't have gone far. But within hours, the scope expanded 2 miles. Each day brought new hope and new frustration. Day 1, dozens of footprints were found near a stream, small ones. At first, they seemed to match Dennis's shoes, but as the team followed them, they realized the tracks came from a Boy Scout troop searching nearby. False lead. Day 2, a red object was spotted from the air. Teams rushed toward it, hearts pounding only to find a discarded soda can. Day 3, the first dogs arrived from Knoxville. Their handlers said they caught a faint trace of scent near a trail intersection, but then the trail went cold. Rain washed everything away. The park's chief ranger, Lee Snedden, later said, "We had the best people, the best resources, and the best technology of the time. And we still found nothing. That's what makes it terrifying." By the end of the first week, the search took a strange turn. Without any public explanation, a team of U.S. Army Green Berets from Fort Bragg arrived on site. The military said they were there to help coordinate logistics. Bad witnesses, including other rescuers, recalled that the soldiers kept to themselves, operated under a different chain of command, and searched specific zones away from civilians. No one ever learned what exactly they were doing. Some even claimed the Green Berets were armed, highly unusual for a civilian search operation. When reporters asked about it, park officials offered vague responses. The Army declined to comment. To this day, the Green Beret involvement remains one of the most mysterious aspects of the case. Why would an elite military unit deploy for a missing child in a national park? And why so secretive? The Smokies are not kind to those who underestimate them. Dense undergrowth hides sinkholes and drop-offs. Caves, fissures, and abandoned mine shafts are scattered across the park. Some are so deep that light disappears within a few feet. As days turned into weeks, rescue teams were exhausted and disoriented. The smell of damp earth clung to everything. Helicopters thundered overhead, their rotors whipping through fog so thick it looked like smoke. They used ropes to descend into ravines. They followed the streams, thinking Dennis might have followed water downhill, but not a single clue surfaced. No torn clothing, no footprints, no remains. It was as if the boy had simply ceased to exist. After 10 days, the FBI officially joined the investigation. Agents began interviewing campers, rangers, and anyone who had been in the park that weekend. Every detail was examined. Did anyone see strangers nearby? Were their vehicles leaving the area suspiciously fast? Did any of the families have enemies? The answer was always the same: no. One FBI agent later described the case as a complete void. No direction, no pattern, no evidence. The agency stayed involved for months, then quietly withdrew. Their files on the Martin case were sealed. Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests decades later revealed that many documents had been redacted or missing entirely. Whatever they found, or didn't find, remains a mystery. Meanwhile, a lead emerged that should have changed everything. A man named Harold Key, camping with his family about 6 miles away, told rangers that on the same day Dennis vanished, they heard a terrifying scream echoing through the forest. Moments later, they saw what Harold described as a rough-looking, disheveled man dotting through the trees, moving fast, as if trying to avoid being seen. The man appeared to be carrying something over his shoulder. The Keys assumed it was a poacher and didn't think much of it until they returned home and saw the news about the missing boy. They immediately contacted park officials, but incredibly, the report was delayed for nearly a week before being acted on. By the time investigators reached the area, torrential rains had erased any possible evidence. This mishandling would become one of the case's most controversial failures. If the scream and the sighting were connected to Dennis, it might have been the crucial clue they needed. But by then, it was too late. By the end of June, with over 1,400 people having scoured the mountains and 56 square miles of wilderness covered, the search officially began winding down. Dennis Martin was gone without a trace. In the vacuum of answers, theories began to take root. Some believed Dennis had simply gotten lost and died of exposure, though that couldn't explain why not a single sign was found. Others thought he might have fallen into a cave or crevice too deep for searchers to reach. Then came the darker possibilities: that he'd been abducted, perhaps by a drifter or hermit living off the grid, that he'd been attacked by a wild animal, his remains carried far from sight, or that something far stranger had happened, something no one could quite name. Each possibility made sense on paper, and yet each fell apart under scrutiny. By the time the official search ended, the Martin family refused to give up. William Martin continued to return to Spencefield for years, sometimes alone, retracing the same steps. He kept hoping he'd find a clue everyone else had missed: a shoe, a shred of fabric, anything. He never did. The tragedy shook the National Park Service. It changed how search operations were managed nationwide, leading to new protocols for coordination and communication. But it also left behind something intangible, a wound in the collective psyche. Even decades later, park rangers and locals lower their voices when talking about Dennis Martin. The woods of the Smokies, they say, never felt the same after that day. By late June 1969, the Great Smoky Mountains were no longer the quiet wilderness they had been when the Martin family arrived for Father's Day weekend. More than 1,400 volunteers, rangers, and military personnel had trampled the wet undergrowth, searching for a trace of 6-year-old Dennis Martin. Helicopters thundered overhead, bloodhounds scoured the ridges, and the U.S. Army's Green Berets arrived, an unusual deployment that immediately fueled public speculation. Despite weeks of effort, no article of clothing, No footprint. Not even a scrap of fabric was ever confirmed as belonging to Dennis. It was one of the most exhaustive but least fruitful search and rescue missions in U.S. history. The official theory remains Dennis wandered too far during a game of hide-and-seek, became disoriented in the thick vegetation, and succumbed to exposure when rain and near-freezing temperatures swept the mountains that night. Rangers have called the Smokies a green labyrinth, where a few wrong steps can mean miles of rugged terrain between a lost hiker and the nearest trail. Wildlife, scavengers, and decades of weather could easily erase traces of a small child. Some investigators considered a bear or wildcat attack, since the area was home to both, yet trained search dogs never located remains, and no drag marks or blood were found. Experts note that predator evidence fair, bone, or disturbed soil always surfaces within days. Non dit erre. The theory that most haunts readers today came from a Tennessee man camping roughly 6 miles away, who reported hearing a scream and later seeing a rough-looking man running through the woods, carrying something over his shoulder. The FBI examined the statement, but found no corroborating evidence. Still, the timing and distance fit the first hours after Dennis vanished, and the story became the seed of every later abduction hypothesis. When the case file closed in the early 1970s, curiosity didn't. A few details, some mundane, some ambiguous, created fertile ground for speculation. Why had the Green Berets joined the search, yet worked apart from Rangers? Military records show the soldiers were there for logistical support, but rumor insisted otherwise. Locals whispered of covert operations or classified experiments in the national park system. Why did official reports seem incomplete? Early record-keeping was inconsistent, yet gaps in paperwork looked, to later readers, like deliberate omission. By the 2000s, online forums and podcasts were interpreting those silences as evidence of something hidden. As true crime media boomed, the Martin case merged with a larger mythology. The missing 411 phenomena. Researcher David Paulides cataloged hundreds of puzzling park disappearances with recurring patterns, sudden weather shifts, loss of scent for tracking dogs, clusters near boulder fields or streams. Dennis Martinez's story became the archetype. Paranormal circles proposed everything from secret cave networks to cryptid creatures. In Smoky Mountain folklore, tales of wild men or feral hermits long predate. A few old-timers even connected Dennis's disappearance to those legends, claiming there were places in the range where people aren't meant to go. No verifiable evidence supports any supernatural angle, yet the human mind dislikes a vacuum where facts end, stories rush in. Half a century later, the Martin mystery is woven into American pop culture. True crime podcasts dissect the timeline. YouTube documentaries retrace the trail with drones and GPS overlays. Reddit users analyze declassified search maps, pixel by pixel. In each retelling, the Smokies become less a park and more a character, beautiful, secretive, ancient. Experts on search and rescue psychology suggest the fascination comes from control. We study these cases hoping to prevent another, yet part of it is spiritual. A vanished child forces society to face the thin line between civilization and wilderness, knowledge and mystery. For the Martin family, the story never became folklorette, remained loss. Their quiet dignity kept the tragedy from becoming tabloid fodder in the early years. But their case led to tangible change. National park protocols for missing person searches were rewritten. Volunteer coordination improved. Record-keeping standardized. Every modern rescue effort in the Smokies traces its methods back to 1969. And still, when the mist closes in on Spence Field or Russell Field, rangers sometimes say you can feel the weight of that unsolved chapter. Not as a haunting, but as a reminder. Nature keeps her secrets well. Dennis Martinez's disappearance endures because it touches a universal nerve. America loves vast, open spaces, yet fears what hides inside them. The story bridges that paradox our need for exploration against the unease that some places may never yield all their truths. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what happened to Dennis, but why, after 50+ years, we still can't let go. In the silence of the Smokies, a child's laughter once echoed. The mountains swallowed the sound, and the world has been listening ever since. By mid-September 1969, after 3 months of combing the Smokies, the official search for Dennis Martin was called off. The mountains were returning to their autumn quiet. But the Martin family could not. They left with no answers, no remains, only the echo of their son's laughter somewhere out in the green distance. In the years that followed, every new discovery in the park, every small bone fragment, every torn piece of fabric was tested, analyzed, and ultimately ruled out. Hope lingered longer than logic usually allows. For the Martins, each rumor was a reopening of the wound. For the Rangers, each new theory was a reminder that the wilderness can humble even the most determined human effort. The FBI kept the case active for years, though most of its work was administrative, following up on tips, re-examining physical evidence, and maintaining communication with park officials. In 1974, the Bureau closed the file with the conclusion that no foul play could be proven. Still, the secrecy surrounding certain documents, especially those related to the military's participation, continued to feed speculation. Decades later, Freedom of Information Act requests yielded only partially redacted reports, their black bars suggesting to conspiracy-minded readers what the official record could not, that something larger had been concealed. But in truth, experts say, the opacity was bureaucratic, not conspiratorial. Classified communication protocols, not hidden creatures or covert operations, were responsible for those blank spaces, yet the public imagination had already run far ahead of fact. Through it all, the Martin family displayed extraordinary composure. Dennis's father, Bill Martin, remained in contact with park officials for decades, even participating in later Serchandra training exercises. His quiet persistence helped inspire a new professionalism among rescuers, a transformation that would save countless lives in later years. When asked, he rarely spoke of the stranger theories. His focus stayed on his son, on the memory of a playful, curious boy who loved the outdoors. In interviews, his words were gentle but resolute. If there's anything we can learn from this, it's to never underestimate how quickly the mountains can take a person away. The disappearance of Dennis Martin fundamentally changed how America searches for the missing. The Incident Command System, the modern standard for coordinating Serchandra operations, was influenced by lessons learned from the Smokies in 1969. Record-keeping and communication between agencies became standardized. Training protocols now emphasize lost person behavior, a discipline that studies how age, experience, and environment affect survival chances. In a sense, every rescue that ends successfully in the modern park system owes a quiet debt to the child who was never found. Today, hikers still visit Spencefield, where the Martin family last gathered. Some leave small toys or notes under the shelter near the Appalachian Trail. The park rangers rarely speak publicly about the case, but among themselves they call it a reminder. Even with GPS, drones, and thermal imaging, the wilderness remains vast enough to lose a human being without a trace. Satellite images and modern mapping have never revealed a clue. Each spring, when the fog drifts through the hollows and rain whispers against the leaves, it's easy to imagine how quickly a small shape in bright red could vanish between one heartbeat and the next. Why does this story still haunt Americans half a century later? Partly because it resists closure. The case combines innocence and danger, human limitation and natural mystery, the ingredients of every timeless legend. It is the kind of riddle that sits at the intersection of science, psychology, and myth. Books, documentaries, and online sleuths have revisited the timeline countless times. Yet the essential question remains untouched. How can someone disappear so completely in an era of search dogs, helicopters, and national attention? The Smokies' answer seems to be silence. In a country built on exploration, the disappearance of Dennis Martin stands as both tragedy and metaphor. It reminds us that discovery always carries risk, that beauty and danger often share the same path. The Great Smoky Mountains are not malevolent. They are indifferent ancient witnesses to countless human stories. Some told, some lost forever. Perhaps that is why the case endures. It speaks to our deepest uncertainty, that for all our technology and progress, we still live at the mercy of nature's vastness. In that realization lies both fear and reverence. As twilight settles over Spencefield, the wind moves through the trees with a low, steady sound. To some, it is just the breeze. To others, it is a whisper from 1969. Reminder that not every mystery is meant to be solved.